IVM.
This is Audiogyan, and I am your host, Kedar Nimkar. Welcome to a deep dive into the minds of luminaries from the Indian creative world. Welcome to Audiogyan. This is a part of series which is called Where Are the Designers? A series which features top 12 influential design leaders talking about their process of hiring, challenges in finding and retaining talent, and some tips and tricks for young designers. I'm also happy to introduce my co-host for this series, Abhinit. Abhinit Tiwari. He's a designer at Gojek. Hey, Abhinit, welcome back.
Hey Kedar, happy to be back again and happy to be talking to Srinath today.
Yeah, so we have Srinath Rangamani with us on Audiogyan today. He's been a guest at Audiogyan back in Jan 2019, where I remember we had met in a studio in Bangalore and we spoke about Swiggy's design philosophy. It's a must-listen kind of episode. Srinath heads the design at Swiggy, previously at Myntra, StoreMate, and Adobe. He's a digital designer with over 15 years of experience in the creative interaction and product design world, building mobile apps, web, and many other things. Hey, welcome back, Srinath. Welcome to Audiogyan, and pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Kedar. Thanks. Good to be back. And hi, Abhinit. And it's great to have an interaction with you folks. Been a long time. Times are tough. I hope everyone is staying safe and staying home. And these are tough times, and I wish all the listeners good health first. And you folks as well.
Yeah, it's so far good. Bombay, it's recovering a little bit. Abhinit, what's at your end in Indonesia?
So far, we are still at, hopefully, we are still at the lowest part of the first wave ending here, and hopefully there won't be a second wave. So far, so good, hanging in. But yeah, scary times. A lot of people having a really tough time. So same as Srinath, I hope everybody stays indoors and stays safe.
Yeah. Cool. So Srinath, we have like a surprise round for you. I had shared some questions, but this is sort of a rapid fire round, which is a new thing in Audiogyan.
Super.
Yeah, there would be 10 questions, and we are making notes, and hopefully we'll circle back on some questions which could land you in trouble also. But yeah, just feel free to.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's
so the first question is, because you're in Swiggy, what's your favorite food?
Paneer butter masala.
Paneer butter masala. Okay, like a Tamilian having.
I'm a typical Indian kind of. Yeah, I know that's kind of a surprise. No idli, no upma. So nice. I'm a big paneer fan. So paneer and pizzas.
Wow, great. This is, I don't know whether you'll have the latest data, but any record of fastest time like a delivery boy delivered through Swiggy?
Yeah, I think we have set quite a few records. If I can recall, around 14 minutes or 13 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard some people actually getting their order delivered in less than like some 15 minutes. So somewhere around 13 or 14 minutes. Must be close by. But record is a record.
And the longest time, which probably...
Oh, that's not good. Could be well over an hour.
Okay. Okay. What do you look in a designer? Attitude or aptitude?
Attitude is more important. So I think when you are coming into design, you need to have a great attitude towards things, like curiosity towards things, and you have to listen to people first. So you should be a people person. So attitude drives a lot of that listening behavior. So I think I would pick attitude.
Superb. What impresses you more? Portfolio full of like eye candy stuff, or like a well-written Medium article?
I think it's a mix of both. Different people have different skill sets. And it's the ability of the person to use the skill set to drive a certain mandate that they are responsible for.
Nice.
That makes or breaks a designer. But of course, always well-articulated thoughts, are valued. So it depends on the articulation. You can have a visual storytelling in Dribble, or you could have a great Medium article in words, but pictures speak 1,000 words. Both of them actually make sense.
Your favorite design quote?
Design is never done.
Okay. Favorite designer in India, if any, or outside India? Be it any domain.
There are a ton of people. I love my design team. Actually, all of the people in my design team. Just love them. So, I love Prasanna and my team and Sapta, so many folks. Apart from that, yes, of course, Sunith is one of those folks whom I love. Outside, I think I love Mike Matas. He's one of those people who actually inspired me to come to product design long back. So when I joined Adobe, there were a couple of designers there, who inspired me. So
great.
Many people. Actually, I don't even know where to start. It's just, there's Star Wars all around, So if it's India, I think it's much easier.
Nice. Your favorite interview question?
My favorite interview question. Okay, this is a googly. There are many questions, but these days, what is design? May come out cliche, but then that's the gotcha. Always.
Super.
So because different people give different answers, so it just excites me.
Okay. So this one I'm adding on the fly, that have you ever ordered from Zomato?
Yeah, a lot.
A lot. Okay. Just to test the bugs or the experience, or generally availability? Or maybe paneer
it's a mix of both. Yeah, it's a mix of both. Yeah.
Nice.
I think they're good in certain areas, we are good in certain areas, so it just works out. As a consumer, I think you should be open to options.
Sure.
But
Your favorite app then, out of those, general?
Oh, general. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a tough question. I love Facebook Paper, and I love Airbnb. Airbnb is one of my favorite apps. I think great respect for that team. Yeah, many apps, but I think these two come to my mind.
Okay. And your last, your first reaction, or what are the words which just come out of your mouth when a PM comes with a solution rather than a problem statement? This is my personal favorite, so I just thought. Sorry?
Yeah, okay. I'll just ask them to come to the whiteboard and answer a couple of questions.
Nice.
But these days it's been a challenge. Yeah. No whiteboards.
Yeah, no whiteboards. Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I think these were the rapid fire round, and we'll move on to the main question and the main topic of today.
Quite a few googlies there. I'm hoping that I answered them correctly.
You dodged all of them really well, Srinath. Do not worry.
Okay.
Abhinit, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, let's switch gears. So to start off, Srinath, let's start from the very beginning.
Right.
The first thing we want to know is, of course, the theme of this series is where are the designers? So the first thing I'll ask you is, if you could recall for us at the start of your design career, when was the first time that hiring designers really became a P0 problem for you? And how was that experience?
Okay. So I think product design in India sort of picked up in 2010, 11 types. I think when Flipkart and at Myntra and Adobe actually had a very good design team.
Yep.
That's the OG design team, as I know of, because I'm from Adobe. So actually that's where I saw Jay actually picking up hiring big time, and he set up a huge team. And personally for me, where it got kicked off is at Myntra. That's where most of the validation happened, that yes, design is finally here, and Indian companies need lots of designers, and designers can actually influence the product, right? So all of these things, and then where are the designers? The question came from, I think 2013 onwards, when I started setting up the Myntra team. Whereas was first time when I talked to the HR team, they were like, yeah. We should have a big design team. And I was like, yeah, sure. What do you think? 4 or 5 or something? Like, are you kidding? We should have 10, 15 member team. I was like, whoa, wow, cool. So that's going to be good. And that was my first experience where I felt that, okay, fine. Design is now being seen as a P0 sort of a thing, because, and funnily, I was having a chat with the then CTO, CPO, Shamik, who's a great influential leader at Myntra. And he was like, yeah, we should have what is the ratio you're looking at? I was like, yeah, I want some 1:7 ratio or something, right? 7 engineers to 1 designer. And he was like, okay, cool. That's first world, but we will try. We'll try to get at least 1:10. And he got actually that. So I felt that around 2013 at Myntra is when actually I saw design becoming a P0 sort of a hiring thing. And it's been crazy for the past 3-4 years. I mean, it's just picked up, and I mean, no more questions of where are the designers. It's like people start with, okay, where's my designer? Like, you should be already here, right? Like, so that's where most of the discussions today start with that.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah. In fact, I remember. Sorry to interrupt, just but I remember I recently saw the Jobs movie again on Netflix, and when he was moving, he was moved to, I think, Lisa or the new Mac team. I think the new Macintosh team. He just enters and says, "Where is the designer?"
Where's the designer? Yeah. the design and the team. Where's your design team? He asks. Design team. So, yeah, such a classic.
Yeah.
So to move forward, Srinath, let's talk about how do you do hiring at Swiggy these days, and we have to begin with sourcing. So I have to ask, like, what do you do about sourcing? Is it typically the HR that sources the pool for you, or is it the designers and you yourself who hustle together a pool? How do you go about finding designers?
Okay, I should be careful not to spill the beans because we have our own secret way of finding designers. But let me try to put it as much as I can. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough problem, to be very frank, right? Like, there are a lot of designers, but then to pick the interest of good designers, it's a huge challenge, right? Like, and also if you see, if you look around, like everybody is sort of hiring, right? Like, and so retaining the talent and hiring good talent is turning out to be a huge, humongous challenge, right? And so hiring is like a wave, I would say, for us, right? Like, you begin early, you'll have 2 to 3 waves, like, where you'll have 5 to 6 sets of designers who are talking to you, who are expressing their interest. Would sound sort of different, but I would say it's, you do the vibe check, right? Like, and I mean, you may ask what is vibe, but then vibe is there, right? Like, right, for design teams, it's so important to have a vibe. So it's like the first wave is about finding out the vibe, and then figuring out, okay, fine, like, for the role that we are looking at and for the opportunity or the product that we are creating, like, who are the set of designers, right? Who we would like to have, right? Like, and that is the second wave where we look at and start to prune a lot of folks. Of course, like at Swiggy's level now, like, when we started, we had to go and say, hey, we are a great design team, we are hiring, and people would say, oh no, like, first put out a good app, right? And then when we redesigned the app, and there was a little bit of interest. Now there's loads of interest, right? Like, when you put out a tweet, like there's some 300, 400 people immediately sort of responding, and we've been very grateful to attract talent like that.
Yep.
But then again, right, like, you've got to have a pool of designers who are interested, because you cannot always hire, right? Like, but at the same time, when the time comes, you can't go searching. So it's important to build sort of a backlog or a pool of people who are most likely to fit in your design team and suited for your own product, and keep the pool always engaged, interactive. So when the time comes, like, you start moving the conversations ahead. So that's what we try to do.
Sure.
And a big part of it also comes from referrals as well.
Yeah. I was just going to get to that. Like, I was just going to ask, how big a role does referral play in your sourcing in the pool?
Yeah, I think it plays a huge role, because, I mean, design teams are pretty small, right? Like, and I talked about the vibe check, and vibes usually come from, like, people around you, right? Like, they have the similar mindset. But of course, you want to make sure that the team is diverse, but at the same time, you want to know, I mean, like, your people understand what fits, this company, and what are the needs, and who are the people with the right skill set, the right mental attitude to sort of come in and start contributing. Right. So obviously, when you're a smaller team, actually referrals work quite well, right? Like, because, you're actually telling your friend that, hey, this is quite a small team, you're still growing. Why don't you come in? You'll play a pivotal role in sort of building this team.
Yep.
So that's when I think referrals are great. But beyond a certain point, like, I mean, it's a small community. How many more designers would you know, right? Like, even if you have like 1 to 5 networking, thing, like you would at most refer some 4 to 5 designers. Right? You have to vouch your life for that.
Sure.
Right. So I think it's a mix. When you become a larger team, though, referrals would become 30 to 40 or 50% of it. And the other 50% is going to be around, hey, I mean, like, pool of designers, even colleges, right? Like, fresh recruits, because now you have the depth in your team to make sure that there are enough mentors in your team, leads in your team to go ahead and hire folks, diverse set of folks, right? Like,
Sure.
So their experience doesn't matter. So,
Yeah.
So I have to double click on that vibe check bit, Srinath, for sure. All of us know like it's like culture fit and vibe is important. But to me personally, it feels like, the candidate is having a great day and you're also having a great day. There's not much science to it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Could you share with us any Srinath tips that you have for, what do you do to get a vibe check? Or if you have any stories of, sometimes you get into the room, start talking to the person and you immediately know this is not going to work out. So what are some of those red flags for you?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say it's more of having a fun time or having more interactivity in the session.
Sure.
It is about connecting at a personal level, right? Like, where you're opening up. You may be a very quiet designer, like, you may be an introvert, but how comfortable are you, right? Like, in sort of opening up as a professional, right? Like, and how do you think about design, right? Like, what's your mental sort of focus around some of these things? Where do you want to go, right? Like, those kind of things. People who sort of are very interested in the role sort of open up. So I'm talking about opening up where you're sharing ideas around, what have I done? Why did I love design in the first place? What excites me even today to put a pixel, right? Like, of course, like from the outside, it looks like, okay, earlier you designed for fashion, now you're designing for food.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law says that, okay, now earlier you sold clothes, now you're selling food. That's the big difference, right? Like, nothing else. But then what excites you about this role, right? Like, what excites you about this career in the first place? Yeah. So that needs to connect for us, right? Like, at least for me, in the design teams that I've built, the designers are very passionate about some of these things, right? Like, they look at the minutest of the details, they care about it, and they want people to fret about some of these things.
Sure.
And that's what we look at when we're going into a session where we feel that, okay, like, white check is basically about like how excited are they about design, right? Like, are they willing to push the agenda forward, right? Like, are they willing to connect with people at a personal level, understand and empathize with what other people are trying to do, not just users, right? But also the internal folks.
Yeah.
Like, because if you can't connect or collaborate at a personal level, I don't think you can design better, because design is a very inclusive process. It can't be left. It's so important to be left to one person or one team or one discipline, right? So I think it's important that you may be an introvert, you may be a quiet person, but then when it comes to speaking design, when it comes to articulating your design thoughts or your design decisions, right? Like, how do you open up? You've got to be beautiful, right? Like, you've got to open up all your feathers. You've got to show all your things, right? Like, and attract ideas, right? And that's what we look at in the vibe check. And this could come, I mean, different people have different things, right? Like, some people would open up in terms of skill sets where they will come and say, okay, this is what I can bring to the table, like, very flavorful sort of things. Other set of people are going to be like, no, I'm very good in thought process, and this is the depth of thought that I carry, and this is what I can contribute to the team and to Swiggy as in general. So vibes come in different form, but it's generally about that intuitiveness, that engagement, and that a sense of purpose, right? Like, where I want to come in and just influence a team or influence leadership. I don't want to just be there putting pixels and be happy about shipping shiny things. Of course, that is also very, very important, equally important. But then, having that motivation, right? Like, having the desire, the driven, right? Like, that you're actually driven to do something. That's what I mean by vibe check. Right. And otherwise, like, the problem is, like, if you don't find people like that, I mean, like, there's this paraphrasing Steve Jobs, right? Like, he used to say, A players hire A players, right? Like, so, I mean, if you don't hire them, like, of course, you're going to bring everyone down, right? Like, so that's a very, very typical problem, that a design leader at least carries, right? Like, compared to other leaders where there are different jobs, but then design is just one job, right? Like, so there's no, it's a multidisciplinary job, right? Like, you have UI, UX, everything, but then it all has to come in totality and matter to the user, right? Like, so vibe check is important from that perspective, not necessarily about friendliness or connecting at a, personal level. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. Lots to pick on there, but I'll let Kedar pick on.
No. In fact, I'm picking from one of the threads. So I believe you're doing like a great job with Swiggy design folks, the Instagram handle that you have. Is that one of the reasons or one of the initiatives within the company to make other designers, I don't know, envy or just look at what kind of culture you're building and what sort of talent you have?
Yeah, I don't think it was done to envy anyone, right? Like, I think our goal of doing the Instagram was we wanted our story to come out, right? Like, we wanted our designers.
But yeah, the envy part was mainly for people who are not in the professional workforce yet.
Okay.
Like the college vibes has that thing, right? I would like to be a part of this. Why am I not part of this? That's where I was coming from. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So absolutely. I think one of the reasons for us was to do it was when you're a small team, almost everyone knows who's who, right? In a design team, right? Like, the community knows. It's a very small community as well, and the word spreads fast. But then, as you become a big team, not everyone is great with storytelling, right? Like, and so it's important to empower designers to tell their own story, right? Like, and so we found out that we wanted to do at least one initiative where we introduce our designers to the outside world, right? Like, and let them tell their own story, right? Like, everybody has an interesting story to say in terms of why they came to design or what is that they're doing at Swiggy Design and what do they work on, right? Like, our idea was to basically do something where we can connect, touch base with the outside world and share our ideas, share our learnings. That's where we began, but then pandemics took over and we couldn't do the part 2. So it was supposed to be a 3-part series in which we say, okay, we'll do introductions first. Second, we'll ask the designers to sort of come in and share their thought process, of any project that they worked on or something. And then eventually, do a very fun series, right? Like, but then we will definitely do it. But the idea was, for the design team to sort of tell their own stories. And Instagram is one of those ways where we began that.
Sure.
Interesting.
So taking a bit of a tangent here, but and the next thing I want to ask about is what are your views on internships? Like, what value do you think interns add to the design team, and at Swiggy specifically? Like,
right.
How did the conversation with your team or with yourself go that, hey, we should probably hire interns? Like, how do you decide?
I think,
And just to add to that, my understanding is also Swiggy must have been quite fast-paced,
right?
Being like becoming a unicorn in just 3-4 years. It's definitely like a fast-paced environment,
right,
as per my guess.
Yeah.
So how do you balance even interns if they're coming in?
Right. First, I think for the longest time we didn't have any interns. We didn't even open internships. That's because of the nature of the business in itself, right? Like, Swiggy has a very complicated sort of a business where you have where you're interfacing with the consumer at one end and you have restaurants on the other end, and then there's delivery partners, right?
Yeah.
So for designers to understand this ecosystem and to gain a certain mastery in understanding the business, it takes a lot of time. But then over a period of time, like what you say, like because it's very fast paced, you tend to innovate faster, and then solutions become very repeatable, right? Like, and that's when you need fresh minds, fresh ideas. And that's when we said that, okay, like, I think we are in a phase where we need to innovate fast. And, but one thing we were very clear about, that we didn't want interns to come in and become a pair of hands for us. That's not why we should hire interns for.
Sure.
Interns should come with a fresh perspective. They should come in and break the mold and bring something new, either in terms of skills. Like, for example, we knew that our storefront is mostly static of sorts. Like we had good visuals, but then the whole world is moving towards more storytelling, where motion is there, video plays a big part. in sort of defining the storefronts, etc., etc. So we actually had an intern who's capable of bringing in these dimensions to the product, right? Like, so it's a win-win for both, right? Like, the intern is actually coming in with a hustle mindset to come in and say, okay, I know this, I can get this done, so I'm going to help you do X, Y, Z things, right? Like, so that's what you do as an intern, right? But at the same time, you don't want that to be like, good job, like, go back to your college and present whatever that you want to do, right? Like, we want it to be going into the app, right? Like, whatever that they're doing, they should be usable in the app.
Sure.
Right? Like for one of the interns who joined, actually created walkthrough videos for Genie, which actually went inside the app, and that person felt really, really vindicated for taking internships at Swiggy. Right? There was a second intern from Roorkee who actually joined and who's now a full-time designer at Swiggy. Nice. Right? Like, he came in and did the Apple Watch app, right? Like, and he's now a full-time designer at Swiggy. So we actually use the app. The Apple Watch app was actually done by one of those interns, right? So but then if you ask me, there are no interns now, because we know that there is a phase where the company goes through where you allow interns to come in and a lot of ideas bubbling up, and that's where an intern can thrive. And we also have the time to actually guide the intern, nurture the intern, and then give them something back.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost about that, and that's where we feel that internships again, like, needs to be valuable, win-win for both. Right. If it's not, then there's no point in having, because and it's becoming increasingly challenging, right? Because interns actually learn passively. Right, like, there's no active learning that happens, right? Like, they're very distracted, and they want to get stuff done, and you can't tell them to do X, Y, Z things, right? Like, you just tell them largely this is what we're looking at, and why don't you go ahead and explore, right? That's what you can do. In a work from home setup, it becomes really tough, because like the true nature of intern is like observing someone discussing and then picking up something from that and then trying to apply it in their work and see if that's the career that they want to build or not, right? And unfortunately, all of these conversations are now becoming meetings, right? And we know terrible at meetings. And that's where we paused internships for now, because we want to do justice when we pick people up. And I mean, they're going to decide a career based on their experience at Swiggy. So for now, it's on hold, but we love interns, right? Like, and we will definitely open up a lot of positions, internship positions very soon.
Yeah. And you mentioned something interesting there. This was a realization the first time I hired interns. I realized that it's a lot of work for the team. Like, just taking out the mental bandwidth to mentor them and to show them the ways. It takes a lot of time.
No, absolutely. I think, I mean, like, if they're going to decide on a career based on the experience, first you have to lead them first, right? Like, you don't want to put a bad impression and then make them go off design. That's the worst thing that you can do. So it's a lot of high bar, actually hiring an intern. And I think design interns are very, very judgmental. They judge you in seconds, right? Like, this is a design team who doesn't even have, Steve Jobs quotes or or any cool scale models or whatever it is. I mean, like, they don't even have Iron Man. Like, I don't know what design team is this. so
all they do is meetings all day.
Yeah, all they do is meetings all day, and they're just sketching. So I think it's a very high bar sometimes. But then it's very important that at least moving forward for the setup in India, internships are going to be crucial. Sort of opening up design as a career option for many folks, because even today, like, a lot of folks are self-taught, and internships is the only way for you to sort of do it and see it for yourself, that if design is going to be a good career option for you or not.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, we'll be right back.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On The Longest Constitution with Priya, get a closer look at laws that protect our children from sexual abuse. Ashton Doctor joins Sadaf and Harshit on Nankari to talk about the mental and physical benefits of intermittent fasting. On Misconduct, Raghavi and Nisha tell us how Seema Parihar went from being a bandit to a Bigg Boss contestant. On The Fighting Goat, Arjun and Somesh talk to Ranjit Ravindran about how mixed martial arts as a sport got so popular in India. And on This Round Is On Me with Gauri, chef Aarti Sampath shares her experience of cooking for Prime Minister Modi when he was in the US. Do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you enjoyed this show or any of our shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the word about a podcast. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week: Ciet Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intuit India. We really do appreciate the support. You are what makes this possible.
And welcome back to the show. So you mentioned about like an intern coming in and applying motion graphic skills or some other skills, right?
Yeah.
So you see a gap, and if the right talent gets in, or if the right talent pitches in at the right time, you can leverage that. I want to just take this a bit broader and touch upon diversity.
Right.
Again, it may not be directly connected, but just in terms of the kind of skill set which certain person brings, or the kind of different perspectives which like a opposite gender or a different kind of a like-minded person or a exactly opposite kind of a person brings in. So is there any, now that it's sort of stable and it's established, are there any guidelines or are there any checks that you have to ensure diversity in the team, be it of any kind?
Yeah, I think as of now, you will have to ensure it. Right, as design leaders, we have the responsibility to make sure that we think about this. You don't want people, you want like-minded people, but you don't want the same people. So, I mean, like, the strength of a design team depends on how diverse it is. And I wouldn't leave it to be too organic at this point in time, because it's not well represented yet. And I think this is where I think design leaders need to take charge and make sure that they make this one of the mandates. And I actually have it as a mandate. I do it purposefully to make sure that I identify talent, nurture them, and include it in the team. It's very crucial, right? Because today's products, if you think about it, they're so diverse, right? Like, you're connecting with people whom we don't even understand sometimes. And our only way of making sure these products work for a billion people is to make sure that you have the intelligence yourself, right? Like, you apply that intelligence in designing some of these products. It's called human intelligence, right? And a lot of things talked about, a lot of people talk about artificial intelligence, but then using your human intellect to sort of figure out, is this the right thing to do? And how do we include the right people, the right decisions? I would like to give an example, right? Like, I stand vindicated by doing one of these things, because if you look at the app today, right, like, a lot of illustrations that get done, they are well represented, because we have a brilliant designer, like, who's actually, she's a female, and she brings a lot of emotions and diversity to the visual language that we do. Right. And then recently we actually did something on Instamart. Like, Instamart is our grocery product, and we had to actually include cigarettes as a category, right? Like, and this was twitchy topic, right? Like, and being responsible by design, it doesn't come to everyone naturally, right? Like, and there was actually a women designer who actually was telling that, hey, this could spin off habits, and we need to design responsibly, and of course, we should have the category because it's what people need. But then, how do we make sure that we give alternatives, right? Like, the different dimensions that came into the product building, that experience building, was phenomenal. Like, if you go to the category, there's actually a banner that says it's not good for you. The way in which it is represented, there are nicotine alternatives that are being presented. Some of it is very difficult if you have only one gender or one type of people who are actually designing some of these products, right? Like, because you need to have people with different experiences and different diverse sort of backgrounds to come in and influence the product building. And at this point in time, we can't leave it to chance, right? Like, you will have to make sure that you work towards this diversity, and you plan out. You need to scout for talent, right? Like, you need to scout. Like, you have to keep searching for talent, and you need to keep this as a mandate almost, to make sure if you want to have a great team, right, that's going to build an experience for a billion people, it's very, very important to build a diverse team.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, Srinath, like with Swiggy, I don't know how many hundreds of cities you folks are in now.
Right, 300,
in India,
I
right?
think. Well, 300 plus, right?
Yeah, 300 plus. Yeah.
So, I was just wondering, like, designing for Indonesia, people ask me a lot of times, like, how does it feel to design for such a diverse, user base? And I keep wondering, and you folks also, like, India is hella diverse within its own boundaries, right? So yeah, third tier, fourth tier towns, they're well represented in your customer base now, but maybe not so well represented in the design team, right? We are all still English speaking metro born designers.
That's correct.
Mostly.
That's correct. But we come from diverse backgrounds though. People are from that area, right? Like, people have come from very remote parts of the country who actually joined the design team. Of course, you join with the mindset, right? Like, Western world influenced a lot of this. So you can't shy away from the fact that, okay, do you have Western influence? You can't say no. Of course you have, right? But then when it comes to designing for your people, right? Like, and your behavior, your habits, it's about how do you bring that inclusiveness, right? Like, somebody tried to include you, right? Like, so you're part of the team, right? Like, so you have to include your own users, right? Like, so I think it comes naturally for some folks, right? Like, and for other folks, of course, you'll have to immerse yourself, you have to talk to users and empathize, right? Like, sympathize, empathize, whatever you do, but just connect with people, right? And understand their problems, right? So yes, it is tough. It is still work in progress, I would say. I won't go to the extent by saying that, Swiggy is all this, we are already inclusive, we are doing this stuff. I think we are taking steps towards it. And given the diversity in our team, we are quite confident that we can achieve it.
Sure.
I'll just take a contrarian view and I don't know how to put it, but I'm just taking a tangent here, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, when you say inclusive, there is one school of thought which says, you sharpen it or you make it 0.03% lightweight.
Right.
We all know which schools it is, right? and you just cater for that sort of audience and keep pushing the envelope or make it super duper sexy for that audience,
right?
And just polarize the rest, not consciously or intentionally, but just because of the nature of what we do.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So any thoughts on reconciling these two thoughts, or they should remain independent? Like, one is being inclusive and making, I don't know, for a lack of better example, but making State Bank of India.
Right.
And one on the other spectrum, you're making like MacBook Pros without even an Ethernet card.
Right.
Or selling phones without charger.
Right.
So there are two extremes here. Any thoughts on that? It's a super duper tangent, I don't know, but just because of your inclusive nature of design, I thought.
That's correct. No, I think there is a hardware and a software split on this. If you are a hardware company, device company, you can make some of these choices because people pay for a bit of the social status there. But when it comes to software is as democratic as it gets, right? If you are not inclusive in software, you will be cut into 1,000 pieces. So there's no death by 1,000 pieces is imminent. If you are a software developer, if you are actually a software company and you're not being inclusive. And these kind of things works for, device companies that drive social status, like Apple probably has got away with it. Even Apple has range of phones, right? Like, that appeals to all of the people, right? Like, Apple is the only company. In fact, I would say it's super inclusive because it has smaller phones, it has big phones, it has accessible phones.
Yeah.
Right. Today, the software, right, is one of the best, right? Like, if you have to use blind person, deaf person, anyone, right? Like, or any person who has any motor issues, right? Normal people, right? Like, who are delusional, right? Like, they can still use it, right? So it's as inclusive. So it's the software that makes it. If you're in the software game, right? Like, and if you're designing for software and you're not inclusive, then it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? Like, so I would say, Android is as democratic as it gets, right? Like, it's extremely usable and it's extremely inclusive, and the success of it actually trumps even iOS sometimes.
Yep.
Right? Like, a lot of features that we seen in iOS, we saw it like from 4 years before in Android. So that's as inclusive as it can get, right? Like, so they clearly are showing a big market share in terms of at least software, if not the hardware. Like, so definitely I would say, you have to be inclusive if you are an app developer or if you're a company who thrives on app or on the internet. So internet is so diverse and it's so inclusive, and it's all democratic. Like, you can't survive if you're not inclusive, in the long run at least.
Sure.
Sometimes it depends on the business also, right? Like, and there are some people who would say, okay, we are designing for India A or India B. I mean, so be it, right? Like,
Bharat.
Bharat. I mean, like, of course, I don't understand that, right? Like, I mean, of course, Bharat is in everyone, right? Like, every Indian, there is a Bharat, right? At the end of the day, we all would like to save money, right? Like, we are all, as stingy as we can get, right? Like, and of course, there's very degree of tolerance that we have, right? That may define us. But when it comes to how you respond to certain things, there is a certain behavior that we all share, right? Like, there's certain habit that we all grew up with. And I think it's the culture, it's the community, it's a feeling of, okay, this is my nation, my country, etc., which will actually eventually play a role, right? And you will have to be inclusive if you want to make sure that your product reaches a lot of those folks. But if you're a niche product, then so be it, right? Like, and then you'll forever be niche.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was nodding very heavily during that answer. And Kedar, to your question, I just want to add that like exclusionary and exclusive are two different things.
Okay.
Right? Like you can still build a luxury product and it needs to be exclusive, right? To appeal to people who are willing to pay extra margin. But exclusionary is a different thing. That's discriminating.
Yeah, that's discriminating.
So if your product excludes some people because it's expensive, that's kind of okay, because that's the cost it takes to build something with that level of attention to detail. But if it excludes people basis of gender, literacy rate, different kind of abilities, stuff like that, I think that should not be acceptable in any category.
Interesting.
Yeah, brilliantly put.
Yeah.
So
Srinath, this is one like very important question, because one of the reasons which why we wanted you to be in the panel was you have built a great team in Swiggy and quite a senior folks as well. So you have, seems to be like some special talent or like some special ingredient which keeps or retains or attracts senior talent, because I have personally faced a lot of gap in that 8 to 12 year bracket, or probably 7 to 11, 15 kind of experience years of designers, right? So you want to highlight few of the things or any challenges you faced, or now that you are in a spot that you have some senior designers in your team, how did that happen, or any insights there?
So I think it requires a lot of effort. I mean, initially a lot of senior designers were not ready to join, right? Like, because we were very nascent app and we didn't have great design back then. We've had challenges.
No, but you said, you mean you identified that pool and then they were not ready, or the pool itself was
they were not ready to join, right? Like, because see, I think senior designers, generally, it's very tough to hire senior lead designers, because first they're working on a problem so focused, right? Like, and they're so involved in a company, right? Like, them to come out of it and see your challenges, your opportunity is very difficult. So, when you actually are looking to hire someone, like, most senior people would think that, oh, Swiggy, it's sorted. They have a good design team. What would I do? Right? Like, but then we know the amount of challenges that we face every day and why we need your talent to come in and sort of find the opportunity, right? Like, and so that articulation is where most of the gap lies today, right? Like, I don't think many senior designers today understand what level of challenges or what level of detailing that goes into building some of these products at these companies. So senior designers tend to think that, okay, it's a big team, it's a big company. Why? I mean, I would do a very small part of it. Of course, you could think that for Microsoft or Google, right? Like, but hell, I mean, like, for established companies like maybe Swiggy or Ola, whatever it is, right? Like, there's still a lot of problems to solve. So that's a gap in understanding, that people think that the problem is already solved, and they don't get enough perspective about what they can do as a talent coming on board. That exists today. So the role that I take is coming in and basically giving a flavor of things, right? Like, where we are, where do we stand, what's the scope of a design team inside a company like us, and how much do they value design, and how inclusive we are, right? Like, if you put out a file, there are 600 people who are looking at the file. And you'll be like, okay, some companies have only 600 people. What is happening to my Figma file, right? Like, so that's the level of inclusiveness that we've brought inside Swiggy, right? Like, so there's this curiosity about, like, what's my designer doing? right? And that you have to excite senior people with that kind of a problem, right? Otherwise they may have a perception that you are so sorted, right? Whereas actually you're so up inside, right? So they need to, matching that talent, with the gap of the opportunity, right? They should see that, and they should see themselves growing in the opportunity, right? That's a big hard sell to do. And that's the first thing that I do when I meet senior designers for hiring. The second part is, of course, everybody is concerned about growth.
Yeah.
Right? Unfortunately, growth is limited to promotions and titles and et cetera, right? And I think that's a big challenge in the industry today also, right? Everybody wants, a lead title or something, but then they're not willing to, sometimes some people are not willing to put in the work that is required for that recognition. So, but then growth can come in many ways, right? Growth, you may have a certain skill set gap, which you would never grow in 6 months time or 1 year time if you're not part of a certain team, right? And if you're willing to grow laterally, then I think it's important to be having that experience, right? To work with a diverse team, right? Where you can learn from each other, right? And you should have had a team, which is always skilled at 3 or 4 great things, right? Not just 1 or 2 things, right? If you're a designer who's skilled at 1 or 2 things, and design is such a multidisciplinary thing, right? You need to know 5 or 6 things to even become a lead. You should be solid in 5 or 6 skill sets to even become a lead designer. So first thing is show the mirror and say, okay, here's what I think the gap is, and here's the design team who has all of these skills, right? Somebody who's really great in interface can learn from someone who thinks critical thinking, right? And somebody who's very great in critical thinking can learn someone who does storytelling. Someone who does storytelling can actually learn from somebody who's doing interface or innovation, right? So you need to be able to sell that part. Okay, this is a team where you can learn fast, you can grow fast, and growth can come in many different ways. It doesn't have to be always linear, right? And linearity is where people lose all the details, right? And when people tend to think about it, they get so caught up by, okay, I grew 10% last year, 20%. Leave all the numbers. Think about are you a better designer, right? Given a situation where you are the only person in the team, right? Are you a better designer than before? Will you be able to steer the ship through? That's something that you need to ask yourself, right? And if you think that, no, I need XYZ skill sets to become there, then you need to find the right team where you can go and join and you can learn from each other and grow. So that is another angle that I look at, where, okay, you can learn free, you can learn animation, you get to work on projects which are very innovative, and there's generally a culture of innovation, and there are great interface designers. So you get a mix of both, and you can grow pretty fast, right? And that's the feeling that senior designers need to have.
Nice.
Second, also, there's another growth path, right? Which is some people aspire to become architects, where they're just focused on one thing. They want to just get stuff done. Whereas other people who are looking at people management, right? They want to go nurture young people, grow a team, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to be able to give confidence to them, like that, we will identify the right growth path for you and set you up for that, right? If you're someone who's really into just, doing stuff, right? Craft, right? Then you go in a certain path and you will be recognized for it, right? People need to feel confident that, okay, I'm a craft person, but that doesn't mean that I won't grow, right? Growth can be defined many different ways. So you have to give confidence to the craft person. Whereas there's a great communicator, right? Who's very, very important in sort of seeding some of these ideas, growing the design influence inside the organization, making sure that there's leadership there. So those people are also set up for the right growth, right? You set up a small team, you make them grow, you put people under them, you train them, nurture them, and eventually make them leaders of their own, right? So everybody has to be leaders of their own, right? And they need to see that growth path when they join the company. And that's very super, super important for me when I'm hiring senior and lead folks. Otherwise, growth becomes a concern, right? Everybody wants to grow. Right, even a CEO wants to grow, right? Wants to become a group CEO. So I think these two are the most important things, in my opinion. That giving a very clear perspective of this is important before even starting the hiring decision.
So many interesting things to pick on there, Srinath. Right. One thing that stands out for me is I found it really funny that if you do everything right and make your product look good, that also necessarily isn't good for hiring people, because people might just think, what do you need me for?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
So
I've had a couple of
funny.
people tell me at face, like, no, you have a great app. What are you going to do? Right? Like, and then you have to tell them the vision. You know, to say, of course, we have a good app, right? We have good designers, right? But we need people like you to come in and build this stuff, right? Like you have to open up a little bit, share some of the details. It'll be very tough, right? Like for a leader, to pitch something which is 1.5 years, which depends on management, leadership, etc., right? You don't want to build a glass house also sometimes, right? Like, it could backfire. So you need to pick the right stories to tell. You need to pick the right things to show the growth path for the person, right? Like, and then eventually sort of make them sort of believe into it, right? And that's when you'll get the right people to sort of connect and join.
I remember when I was in Design Up and I was having a chat with Srinath, and one of the PMs was with me from Book My Show time, and Swiggy, and then like Srinath just opened his principal app, and he said, "Hey, listen, look, this is Swiggy, which is in production, which is V3, and we are working on V8. Okay." So I just want to just show you something. And we were just peeking into the mobile and looking at some stuff. And
Lucky ideas, right?
Yeah, my product manager was like just blown away. बोले यार हम लोग तो मतलब ये design में V3 अगर production पे है तो V3.3 पे ही चल रहा है अभी तो like we haven't pushed and they are working on like V8. बोले yeah, that's how it's supposed to be actually, and that's how you excite other people also to join. And it was great learning for me.
And yeah, man, and I've seen this product grow as a customer over the years, and it's grown beautifully, man. But I don't want to lose one thread from what you said, Srinath. Somewhere when you were talking, you briefly touched on the lack of supply, so to say, for senior designers.
Right.
Do you feel that? And if you do, then I have to ask you, like, who, in your head, who do you hold accountable for this state of design talent, specifically, lack of design talent at senior levels here?
I think there is good supply now, at least now. Earlier, yes, there was a lack of supply. I think designers are their own enemies sometimes.
Sure.
Right? How do you look at seniority, right? Like, and leadership is something that is not natural to a designer, right? Like, you're so obsessed with your craft and you're so obsessed with this that you think all the other things aren't so essential for you, right? And unfortunately, people realize it pretty late, right? And that's
so true.
But people are breaking that mindset today, and we see a lot of people who are actually coming through the ranks and sort of building the right. I always say that skill set is one part of it, but the ability for you, right? Like, if you take a salesman, right? Like, there's no sales guru of sorts, right? You're selling stuff, and what you look for is who is the boss, right? Like, salespeople are very clear. Like, they need a boss who can teach them how to sell. That's their number one goal, right? Like, take any investment professional, right? Like, they look for the same thing. Like, who's my boss? Who's going to teach me about all the specific decisions that they take, so I can also learn to know, how to do speculative sort of investments, right? Like, most of it is pretty much rumor, right? Like, that I'm investing in. So I should have the subjective knowledge to do it. Take the case of engineering, right? Like, they find mentors, right? Like, they are the geeks, right? Like, they're always with geeks, like-minded people. But then the problem with designers, I don't know why they shy away from connecting with designers. What is this trouble in making sure that, in learning something from each other, right? Like, there's always this
pulling each other down.
I don't know, this tussle, right? Like, pulling each other down, or or maybe they're not connecting yet. I mean, we designers have to connect at a very personal level and leverage each of our learnings and strengths, which happens in every other career, right? Like, take sales. I talked to you about this, right? Like, take engineering, take any other profession. The first thing is, who's your boss or who's your mentor? Because they're the one who's going to teach you specific knowledge, nobody else. But in design, it's going to be like, oh, this person is here. Okay, maybe there are two parts to this. One, there is either fear, right? Like, oh, can I even approach this business? Of course, yes, you should. Right? Like, if you want to know something, you should just openly go approach them, know how you can grow, right? Like, that's one part of it. The other part is this fraternity thing, right? Like, so am I part of this or not, right? Who comes into this fraternity? And that's a very, very difficult conversation, because that make sure that it kills creativity in people, right? Like, and I think it's very, very important that designers first need to realize that they need to bring other people on board. They need to pull everyone in and around, right? Like, small designers, big designers, everyone, right? Like, to make sure that this profession in India especially moves to the next level, right? So I think it's partly about designers taking charge, designers realizing that we are in a very important phase. We're probably in a phase where engineering was 10, 15 years before, and every other engineer would join Bangalore startups or Bangalore companies, and they would like go in some fancy cars. It's pretty much like that now, right? Like, of course you are there now, right? Like, so in that case, like, how are you giving back to the community? There are some designers who do it very, very well, right? Like, and for other designers, they need to seek more. They need to find the right mentors and make sure they build the right skill sets and the ability to use the skill set inside different sets of companies. In a technology company, your skill set is only valuable so much, right? Like, if you don't understand the technology that drives the business itself. Like, you need to understand the business and the technology that drives the business, and then design for the technology and people. Right? Like, if you don't do that, and if you say, okay, my design is very I don't know, right? Like, so you know what I mean.
It's too good for these engineers.
Yeah, it's too good for these things, right? Like, so I think that is where most of the problem lies today, and designers have to shed some of these things and go in and be pretty open-minded about how they are communicating, how they are growing, helping each other's grow. And I don't mean to say go and give unsolicited advice. Right? Like, so that also will kill people.
There's enough of that on
right? Like,
social media anyways.
There's enough of that. So that's why, I don't want people to read this and say, okay, now I want to become an expert and go ahead and give. It's about actively seeking mentorship, actively building your ability to nurture your skill sets and know where to use these skill sets in a setup that matters, right? Like, of course, if you're selling, if you're in a commerce company, you have to use design differently, right? Like, it's a storefront, you have to understand storefronts, and then, how people buy stuff and do it, right? Like, and that's a completely different mental model compared to maybe a search product or maybe compared to maybe an AI product, right? So of course, and for all of these things, it's the ability of a designer to utilize their skill sets in effective thinking, in effective storytelling, in effective presentation or effective production, right? That's going to eventually matter. And designers need to seek guidance, mentorship, and learn some of these things before even taking the next step.
Sure.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know. I'm in a sort of a trance, because when I listen to podcasts which are recorded while I'm driving, sometimes I lose track of like next 2-3 minutes, because the point which is made is so important that you just trip on it for some time. And I think Srinath, you did that, because just 2 months ago, me and Sunit were discussing the same thing, right? Which was he's into cycling these days. And he said, even in cycling, so I finished, say, for example, 30 kilometers in an hour. But someone has just finished 10 kilometers first time in his life, and he's like joining the party of 100 kilometer type of gang.
Right.
And he's not felt out of place. He's completely welcomed, and he feels at home, and he's sharing the same vibe. So he said, like, yeah, ye design mein kyun ho raha hai? So even we have seen bits and pieces here and there. And to that, because you were saying so nicely, I was just tripping on the thought that India mein design was always thought as idea first.
Right.
Because it started from JJ and advertising and design schools had this idea, na?
Right.
यार idea का merit तब तक है जब तक खुद के पास है. Idea बाहर चला गया, सबके पास है, तो फिर वो, I think that is that playing at a very meta level, at a very, I don't know, subconscious level, कि यार मेरा cool design है तो मैं cool हूँ. And I'm not putting it on GitHub and not open sourcing it.
I think it's it is playing to an effect, right? Like, but But I think it's also about, I think it's completely reverse to what geeks think, right? Like, and if people, if the code is so cool, they actually first thing they go and put it on open source,
exactly.
right? Like, that's what,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like, because also designers are very judgmental about their work, right? Like they rate their work very highly. Right, like, and you shouldn't take things too seriously, generally as a designer as well as a person, right? Like, because you don't know until it grows into something big. Like, you don't know if that's going to be the most brilliant thing that you've built. Because of course you have to shield great ideas, right? Like, then you should have the insight to understand which idea is something that you should own for yourself versus which are the ideas that you can put it out to show your skills. Or your abilities. So that level of maturity is yet to come in the design community, at least in India. What I've seen is, if you look at China, it's completely reverse, right? Like, they have a site called Zcool, which is almost the equivalent of Behance, which triples. Like, anybody who designs, they just keep putting it. It's like Dribble plus Behance plus XYZ combined, right? Like, and people are so open, right? Like, they don't care, right? Like, it's about, okay, if this idea, if somebody takes, I'll take it from someone else. So this originality, right? Like, designers think that their ideas are original, right? Like, and this originality is the problem. And originality is overrated everywhere, right? Like, and you shouldn't strive to be original, right? Because every idea is taken from someone else or something else. So it's all an inspiration, right? Like, so what's so judgmental about this? What's so possessive about some of these ideas is something that has always been, I've been very free to share. Like, of course, I don't share it openly on the internet because that's not my thing. I'm a very quiet person who's always working on stuff. Sometimes I don't have time. I would like to do it, right? Someday where I would, where I have a lot of time where I can go in and share my thought process itself. But to my designers, I would be very open, right? Like, I'd be very happy to share a napkin sketch and say, okay, go ahead and build it. It's fine, right? Like, and of course, anyway, it's an inspiration which came from someone else. Nobody can think original, and then you can't be very possessive about some of these things and let the idea grow. It's the idea that matters. It's not necessarily where it came from or who it came from. So that mindset is very difficult to adopt if you're so serious about yourself and you're so serious about your work. You should, I mean, like, that's what I love Dribble. Like, although there is a lot of vilification of Dribble designers, I think personally that Dribble is one way where designers are like, heck no, I mean, like, I'll go and express myself, right? Like, I mean, let people be judgmental about things. And I love what people create there, right? Like, and yeah, see, if you think about it, like, they are basically putting out trends that will anyway shape the internet in the next 5 to 6 years. It may not be so great today, right? Like, but who knows, 5 to 6 years later, it may become a norm, right? Like, some of the iOS transitions, some of the iOS designs were done by After Effects designers some 7-8 years before.
Yeah, Flash had amazing. We had an amazing bunch of designers who used to do such creative things in Flash way before iPhone was ever a thing.
Correct, absolutely. So I think wherever you can express ideas, wherever you can, like, put it out, and don't be pretty judgmental about things, about your work as well as other people's work, then you're taking it too serious. Then you're losing the whole fun of designing things, right? So I think if designers can embrace this mindset, the community as well as themselves.
So the way I look at it, and maybe this could be some tip for young designers, that there's a famous quote by Godard, the filmmaker, that it's not important where you take things from, it's important where you take them to.
Correct. Right? Yeah.
So originality is I mean, like a myth, and you just take it and then you take it to the next level, right? And that's where you have your value add done.
Correct. Absolutely.
Hey, let's take a short break here.
Do you like true crime stories?
Do you like to learn about the people behind some horrible, awful crimes?
More specifically, women that may have committed these crimes.
Actually, Indian criminals that are women?
Then we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Misconduct. My name is Raghavi.
And I am Nisha.
We cover themes like murder, dacoity, drug trafficking, financial fraud, kidnapping, and many more.
You can catch us every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast.
And we are back.
Okay, so changing the direction of this train a little, Srinath, and we'll wrap up soon. We won't keep you here for too long, but there's one thing we want to or have to talk about, which is how important is being good paymasters, right? Recent years, we've seen companies do really well. ESOPs are now a good incentive, or at least people trust them a little more than they used to earlier. What role, any thoughts on that, right? Do you think this is a good thing for the industry in general? Or how effective are they for you as a tool to incentivize designers?
No, absolutely. It's a very important tool. It's an extrinsic motivator, but then it's very, very important, right? Like, for people who believe in this, that they can build a career out of this and they're doing impactful work, like, what better way, right? Like, if you think, okay, today's startups and future technologies are being shaped by designers, then pay them well, right? Like, and you can't just get the architect do a beautiful monument or a building and then not pay them, right? Like, of course, like, if you've done that in the past, you have to do it in the future.
Yeah.
And what makes you think that digital designers don't deserve that? So absolutely, I think paying well is very, very important. And that makes sure that there is a stamp of authority on the profession, and people confidently will join this career more and more. And design is so important, right? Like, and such a crucial thing in the future, where it's going to define a lot of how we experience new mediums, right? In that case, I think pay as an extrinsic motivator actually helps the intrinsic motivation, which is to continue to design, right? Otherwise, you look for other professions, right? Where else can I get pay well? Okay, sure, designers can code, designers can paint, designers can do hazard things, but then designers need to design. For that, you need to pay them well. So absolutely in line with that.
Sure.
And if you're a design leader in the company, you need to make sure that people understand that it's very, very important to pay well, like, and do comparison checks across other things, make sure that there is parity. And of course, ESOPs, very, very important. I would say not just for senior lead designers, for everyone, right? Like, and if it's a company policy, where I've worked in some of the companies, I've been very, very grateful to work in companies where it's a company-wide policy, right? Like, and it's an industry leading thing that startups are doing today. And I feel that, okay, if the representation isn't there, first thing, as a design person or a design leader, you need to make sure that there is representation there.
Sure.
And you need to have your share of the pie, because you're contributing to a bigger cause, right? Like, so definitely I think ESOPs is also a great motivator. It makes people believe that, okay, building products, although it's very mundane, it can be rewarding as well, right? Like, it's a day-to-day job, right? Like, when you come in, you have the same set of problems, but then coming in different ways. So you still need to take very high judgment, high velocity call in terms of whether this is going to work or not, and then go and validate them as well. So not many professions do this in the first place, right? Like, so why not, right? Like, pay us well, and we will go and do this validation for you, right? Like,
sorry to interrupt, but Srinath, do you think these are also the aspirations of designers, or should these be the aspirations rather than problem solving? I mean, I'm being too romantic about it, but yeah, it's a practical thing to expect good pays and join. But should that be a motivation?
See, I don't think I think that is a diabolic thing, right? Like, and I don't think designers need to have that as a single-minded focus. And I've seen people do that also, right? Like, they put too much focus on the package rather than the performance, right? Like, okay, if you perform better, then the package will reflect, right? Like, so I think you should put your focus on the performance, right? Like, of course, if you're somebody who's irreplaceable, right? Like, either in the community or in a company, right? Like, of course, you will get paid well. So don't worry too much about the package, worry about the performance. You make sure that you are the best person, best decision maker, best designer in the table. You will be rewarded the right way, and people are very rational about this, right? Like, and if people are not doing it, then you should think about where you should improve, right? Like, in today's world, of course, I won't say all companies are equal, right? Like, there are some companies who are still lagging behind, and that's where I think I encourage all the product folks, the business folks, marketing folks who are listening to this, and if you think that design plays a crucial role in your company moving forward, you need to make sure that you champion this initiative, right? Like, you make sure that you bring in designers and you pay them well. But designers don't need to keep this as a single-minded focus when they are going in, and they need to be focused on their fundamentals, right? Like, if you do good design, which people believe it or not, like you may think that people don't know design, but but people are very, very right. Like, and I've seen it. We've come across a time where, people asked what is design and, et cetera, to now actually know quite a lot about it, right? Like, so they value design, they want to partner with you, and they're great partners. So they will help you grow inside the organization, but you need to show them the value first. So before showing the value, before showing the impact, asking for something that, people should just take a step back and think a little bit about. But of course, everybody has their own ways and means of sort of judging what's the perfect number for them, right? Like, and that's left to their potential to perform and their values or their rewards that they're expecting based on a performance, right? So I think you should have a pretty good intuitive sense about that. Where do I stand? Right? Like, what if the company is here, the opportunity is this, can I do a plus 50 on that? Right? Like, of course you'll be rewarded plus 50. So it all depends on that.
Yeah, true. Well, I think we'll conclude with one last question, which I've been discussing with you offline also one or two times, which was, I remember we having a chat, Srinath, about maybe India will soon have like a super app kind of models where bigger apps will just get more like smaller players into their ecosystem. And then sort of we might land up in a situation where we are again short of talent to handle these mighty Alibaba type setups, right? So bigger design systems, different business perspectives, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to you to again share that bit. What were your thoughts around it? How will the upcoming talent or lead designers will mature into the design leaders of tomorrow? I think you had given some thought about it. Right. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah.
And we'll wrap it up for the day.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, sure. See, I think when it comes to maturity in product design and the influence of design systems inside companies, I witnessed it firsthand. I was very fortunate to have been part of Adobe, right? Like, where the first version of Creative Cloud was getting built, right? And there I witnessed the power of design systems, the systems thinking in sort of building products faster, better, right? Like, so what I've done is from there on, like, I've applied that knowledge inside every company that I go, whether it is at Myntra or it is at Swiggy now, right? Like, and that way you actually show to other designers how it's done, but you don't tell. Like, they get to build it along with you. And that's one way that you need to do as a design sort of lead or a leader, right? Like, that if you have to make sure that you begin some of these things, right, and mature your product experience in a certain way, and you'll have to create opportunities for senior designers, junior designers to sort of get included in some of these projects, so they get first-hand experience of how these things are done. That's the number one thing. That is not happening enough, right? Like, people are very satisfied with just doing incremental work, right? Like, and that's where most of the problem lies, right? Like, if you're looking at, maybe point versions to dot versions to beta releases, then I think you'll only get so far, right? Like, ability to lead, ability to vision are some of these things that you need to build over a period of time. And you need to create opportunities for your design team to sort of express some of these mature product thinking, product experience solutions inside the company first, right? Like, and you have to be an advocate of it. You have to champion some of these things. Company doesn't understand the value of some of these things, but then when you find a problem that there is some productivity challenge, then obviously design systems is the right fit, right? Like, and then you will have to make sure that you move mountains to make sure that these projects are funded in the first place and people work on some of these projects, right? So a lot of people sort of work on this, or designers work on this, and they get first-hand experience about this. So that's one way of sort of developing future leaders, right? Like, that when you're building something like, a vision or something, try to include people early so they get to understand the thought process behind some of these things. They also get to understand the articulation that is required in selling projects like this. They get to also understand what mountains you have to move, right? Like, in sort of even making some of these things happen and why you're doing some of these things. Right, like, and having that knowledge is very, very critical for us to build that future Indian leadership, right? Design leadership, right? So wherever you are, like, try to create opportunities for yourself, try to sell some of these things, get more experience around some of these things. So when you actually go and create your own companies or you join companies as leaders, you can actually bring maturity to the system right from day one, right? Like you don't have to go through the same, of course, when you start out, like you don't have to be like how we started in 2010, 2015. You've come through a certain path, right? Like, but you are at a certain maturity level. Now you can start from that base and you can even aim higher, right? So first thing is prepare future leaders by making sure that you include them in the visioning process so they understand the articulation, the thinking, the selling, communication, etc., interfacing with people, right? Like, and taking tough questions, all these things, like give them exposure to that. And second is exposure to projects, right? That is very, very crucial in building some of these matured design solutions, right? Like, so it's very, very important that you expose people to these two things. And that's where future leaders would come from.
Thanks a lot for that, Srinath. Lots to take away from that, but sadly we are out of time. So we'll wrap up now.
Very kind of you.
Yeah. No, it was really insightful and lot of food for thought here. I think, thanks people for listening till the end. I have a plug in the end, which is I'm heading the design at Jupiter.money, and we are hiring at all levels. So visit jupiter.money/careers. You can follow Audiogyan on Instagram at Audiogyan Moments and visit audiogyan.com for more GAN sessions. I terribly suck at this plug. I hate it, but it's part of the job. You guys want to plug anything? You guys are hiring.
Say.
अभी तो interns नहीं पता है. Srinath?
Yes, we are hiring. So you can reach us at Swiggy Design in Instagram, Twitter. So any of us, and exciting stuff to do.
Cool. Abhinit?
Yes, you can follow Gojek Design at Gojek Design on Twitter and at Design at Gojek on Instagram. And we are also hiring from time to time, and we'll post it there.
Awesome. I think we are I'm making the designer community sell this marketing type stuff also. It's a very marketing thing, right? Yeah. But yeah, just like on a side note, before we conclude, I really love the tweet which went out by Swiggy on Twitter after the Myntra logo was changed. I just loved it. Abhinit, you remember the tweet?
I do. Yeah. Officially post show mein hai kya?
नहीं, ये part है show का.
Okay.
हाँ, तो
yes, I do remember seeing that, Kedar.
Yeah, and it said we saw our logo for 6 hours. यार ये किसका idea था? Like any trivia there?
I don't think we get involved. It's the marketing team's work. So,
okay. Yeah. It was from marketing. Yeah, it was a great one. All right. Thank you, Srinath, for giving your time. And thank you, Abhinit, also. We look forward to have you again. And thank you for being.
Thank you so much, Kedar. Thanks, Abhinit. Wonderful stuff. Had so much fun.
Awesome.
Stay safe.
Yes, take care. And that's it from today's GAN session. For show notes and more GAN, visit audiogyan.com. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to check our other interesting podcast on IVM Network. You can listen to us on IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. To stay tuned, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at IVM Podcast. And if you wish to connect with me, I am at Audiogyan Moments on Instagram. Until then, take care.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से. Hi, I am Sadaf.
And I'm Arshit. खाने का इतिहास, economics, policy, psychology, सब है मेन्यू पे.
Only on the Nankali podcast every Wednesday, सिर्फ IVM podcast app या वेबसाइट पर, या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने podcast सुनते हो.